A family chaos. This is how Diego's would be defined. He grew up in a country house on the outskirts of Lima. He lived with his parents, his sister, and his grandmother. The latter was the owner of a farm that generated a lot of income. For this reason, despite being peasants, they were among the richest in the area. Despite this, the atmosphere in the house was quite uncomfortable. His mother Clara got along fatally with his grandmother Emily, despite being mother and daughter. And that had caused that sometimes he and his sister had to position themselves with one or the other. Most of the time, his sister sided with his grandmother. They had a lot of complicity. The young woman didn't separate from her grandmother, and that made his mother very nervous, who saw how over the years her daughter grew more and more distant from her. In the middle of all this were Diego and his father Carlos. Often, they avoided giving their opinion or positioning themselves, although more than once they had to intercede for Clara, because she was always alone. As he and his sister grew older, the tension increased, and everything was blown up when his father fell ill. His mother devoted herself body and soul to taking care of him, while his grandmother and sister pretended nothing was wrong. That completely broke the trust that Diego had in them. He'd always stayed away from controversy, but his father was important to him, and he couldn't understand how his sister was so cold with his illness. So, 2 months after his father passed away, he and his mother grabbed their suitcases and moved to the city. That happened after his grandmother and mother had a terrible fight. Grandmother had said horrible things to her, things they never intended to hear. They had given their sister the option to go with them, but she preferred to stay. After that, Diego and Clara lived some difficult years. The grandmother had taken everything, even though her daughter had worked for her for years. They only had a small widow's pension and an apartment that her husband had in Lima. They only had money to eat and little else. Diego had to leave his studies and look for a job to help with the domestic economy. His mother fell into a deep depression, so he also had to take care of her and ensure that she took all of her medication. Life for them had become really complicated, but with effort and a lot of work, they managed to get ahead. Diego went back to college and got a degree in communications engineering. His mother recovered and began working in a flower shop. They had finally managed to straighten out their life without depending on grandmother. They hadn't spoken to her or her sister again. This especially hurt Clara, who was often hesitant to call her or not. She had tried a couple of times, and the young woman hadn't wanted to know anything about her. She didn't understand how the situation had become so complicated. But that was the way it had been, and they had to look forward. Diego got a good job, and Clara was very happy with hers. Also, they had a partner, and the four of them got along very well. After many years, life was smiling at them. They felt that they could be happy. But from one day to the next, everything changed. A police officer called them one afternoon to inform them that a person had reported the disappearance of 2 members of their family. They were Diego's sister and grandmother. The person who was in charge of cleaning the family home had gone to the police, after not hearing from them for a week. Diego and Clara got very nervous. The past had returned to their lives in the worst way, and besides, they didn't know how to act. They didn't have any kind of connection with that part of the family, so they didn't know what could have happened either. Still, after talking it over for a while, they decided they should take care of the matter. They weren't bad like Grandma. So without much thought, they took the car and headed to the family home. That was the first step in trying to find out what had happened. The journey was 2.5 hours long, but it seemed much longer. The two traveled in silence, and each one was imagining possible scenarios that could be found upon arrival. In contrast, in the old family home, it seemed that nothing had changed. The furnishings are exactly the same. The house was as clean as ever, and the garden was perfectly cared for. They had hired people who kept everything in perfect condition. But both had imagined that maybe the grandmother had changed some things, especially its rooms. They were the same as always and had clean clothes. Would Grandma wait for them to come back? There was no point thinking about that. They had to concentrate on finding them. At the house, they met with the police inspector in charge of the investigation. He told them that they hadn't found any evidence of kidnapping or anything suspicious. He asked them if they knew of anywhere they could be. If they didn't find any leads, they would declare a voluntary march and they wouldn't look anymore. But Clara knew that her mother wouldn't leave that house. She had built it and cared for it with great care and attention. She wanted to die there, she was sure. The police, having that statement, decided to organize a search through the nearby mountains. In addition, they conducted an inspection of the house. They only missed one thing: a horse, specifically Diego's sister's horse. The horse had disappeared the same day as them. The search through the area didn't give any results. They found horse tracks heading up the mountain. But it could be like the one that was missing, or like any other horse that was going out for a ride. There were several farms in the area, so it was not a decisive test. After several days of investigations, they decided to close the case. The police informed Diego and his mother that they wouldn't continue investigating. They hadn't found anything clear, so they would declare null case and voluntary disappearance. This left Diego and his mother in a difficult position. As long as the grandmother didn't appear, Diego and Clara were responsible for the farm. Many people worked there, and there were many animals. They couldn't let everything go to waste. Clara didn't want to stay there. She had a hard time adjusting to the city, and she was very happy with her job and her boyfriend. He couldn't bear the thought of going back there. So Diego, for his mother, offered to stay. He could work from there, so he actually had it easier. 2 days after the investigation ended, Clara left, and Diego stayed in the large family farm. He settled in his old room and asked an employee to update him on pending matters. Incredible as it may sound, his grandmother had him as the authorized person on her bank accounts. That struck him as strange, especially since they hadn't had contact for years. In any case, it made things quite easy for him. The first days were a real chaos. He didn't know how to do things or who was in charge of what functions. But with the patience of the employees and their desire, they ended up understanding each other and everything worked more or less well. But when he had been installed there for a week, he began to sleep badly. At night, he dreamed of his grandmother. She asked him for help and said that she was going to die. Diego woke up drenched in sweat and with a horrible sensation in his body. A few days after the first dream, he began to hear screams at night. They were screams of terror, like someone asking for help. But when he went downstairs to see if there was someone asking for help, he couldn't find anyone. 2 of the women who worked in the house lived there, and they assured him that they didn't hear anything. But night after night, Diego heard the same screams, and of course he couldn't sleep. He would get up and walk to the stairs, trying to sharpen his ears and discover where those screams were coming from. But he didn't dare to continue walking, and returned to bed to continue torturing himself. After a few weeks, he already believed that he had gone completely mad. He didn't sleep. His mood changed. He neglected the tasks of the farm and his work. Everything had become too complicated, until one night he got tired and decided to follow that voice. He came down the stairs with great care. He didn't want to wake anyone up. When he reached the ground floor, he stopped again, in his tracks to see where the screams were coming from, and his instincts and his hearing told him to go out into the garden. That was his grandmother's favorite place. It was full of flowers of many kinds, fruit trees and endless plants. Despite his delirium of the last few days, the employees kept him perfectly cared for. As he came out, he began to walk along the stone path that was in the middle of the garden. For a moment, he stopped hearing the screams, which worried him greatly. He had made the decision to go to the end, but he didn't want to stay halfway. In just 30 seconds, the howls returned, and each time they seemed to be closer, until he came to a camellia in the background. That was where they came from, but there was absolutely no one. How was it possible? Then he noticed a detail. In that area, there was no grass. There was soil, as if someone had been digging. Then, seized with hysteria, He began to remove soil with his bare hands. He was as if possessed, especially when he discovered that soil was too cool to have been there for a long time. He kept digging until he came across something hard. Then he saw it. It was a hand. He started screaming for help, while he kept digging up dirt with all his might. Soon the 2 employees of the house arrived. When they saw the scene, they were completely petrified. But one of them, the oldest, kept repeating, "I knew it, I knew it." Between the 3 of them, they removed all the dirt and discovered that the body that was buried was of his grandmother. Neither could speak a word. They were completely dismayed. Diego ordered one of the employees to go find the police. He would stay next to the body, waiting for them to arrive. How had her grandmother gotten to this place? Who had killed her? As much as he tried not to think about it, all the pieces fit together. It had been his sister, because otherwise she would be there too. Another issue that disturbed him were those screams. Why did he hear the screams of a dead person? As he was mulling this over, something behind him moved. He barely had time to turn when he saw his sister with an axe in her hands. It was going directly towards him, but he was quick and managed to get away. However, the same didn't happen with the older employee, who came across them in full pursuit and ended up paying the consequences. His sister slashed at her in the middle of the chest. The employee fell to the ground, looking panicky and leaving a trail of blood. Diego's mind was absolutely collapsed. It was too much information for a single day. And he had to hide, or else he would end up dead too. He went to the kitchen where the other worker was, and together they arranged a pile of furniture blocking the door. They were there until they heard the sirens of the police car. Then they opened a window to yell at them that they should be careful, that the young woman carried an axe and she was dangerous. By this time, she was already on the other side of the kitchen door. With the axe, she was trying to open a hole in the door. She was so out of her mind that she didn't hear the sirens of the police car. When they entered the house and ordered her to lower the weapon, she was simply continuing with her task of knocking down the door while shouting, "I just want to kill him. Let me finish him off." The police managed to remove the axe from her and immobilize her. They took her away, but she never had a trial because she was declared mentally ill. Diego returned to the city with his mother and still wonders why he could hear the wailing of his dead grandmother. Neither of them forgives each other for not having acted earlier, not having realized that his sister was ill. Perhaps they could have saved her grandmother. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.